Hello and welcome to CorpusCast, the podcast all about corpus linguistics and what it can do for society. Each episode, we'll explore how the study of language in large corpora is used to tackle challenges in the world relating to education, health and technology, among many others. So sit back, relax and join us as we discover the ways in which corpus linguistics is shaping the future of the study of language. I'm your host, Robbie Love, and I'm a corpus linguist at AstonUniversity. Now, today's topic is the role of corpus linguistics in the study of language acquisition, how people learn language, and, interestingly, how people can be helped to learn language. The process of language acquisition, both in terms of the acquisition of a first language or languages in infancy and childhood, and the learning of additional languages in any and all stages of life, are fascinating. And this is a much researched phenomenon that sits at the intersection of fields including linguistics, psychology, education, and others. Part of this area of study involves looking at the language that is being learned, in the case of today's guest and their work, in English, in order to identify features that may be easier or harder to pick up in the process of acquisition, a concept known as learnability. And this is one of the many contributions that corpus linguistics makes in this area of study. So my guest today is Dr. Phoebe Lin, Assistant Professor in English in the Department of English and Communication at Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Dr. Lin is an applied linguist specializing in phonology, vocabulary, corpus linguistics, and English language teaching and learning, and her research examines natural speech prosody and its role in vocabulary acquisition using a range of methods, including controlled experiments, of course, corpus linguistics, statistical modeling, and software development. So today we'll be focusing on Phoebe's research into what's known as formulaic language. We'll find out all about what that means, and its acquisition in second language learners of English, a topic about which Phoebe has several publications, including the book, The Prosody of Formulaic Sequences. So I'm very excited to welcome to CorpusCast our guest for today's episode, Dr. Phoebe Lin. Hello, welcome Phoebe. It's great to speak to you.
Hi Robbie, nice to see you.
Thank you so much for coming onto the show. It's great to get the chance to have a chat with you about you and your research. All sorts for us to get through, so we'll get started with a question that I always open the episode with, asking all of my guests about corpus linguistics. What does corpus linguistics mean to you?
That's a difficult question because, and also a very interesting one. Because to me, like the textbook definition would be like corpus linguistics is a research area or an academic subject to our students. But to me, surprisingly, I think corpus linguistics is a community. It's a bunch of people that I know. And these people, to me, I think they are resourceful, they are open, they love technology, they are wise people, they are problem solvers. And I think I have very fond memories of like corpus linguists when like the people that I met at conferences. And I think they offer many solutions to problems. And one of the things for me when I conducted corpus linguistics research was that like you often need to find a corpus somewhere, and sometimes having problems with annotating corpus, and like go to any corpus linguist, they will just say that the people have asked for help, like to whom I've asked for help would be the Lancaster people, like Paul Reason, and Andrew Hardy, and they always said like, hey, this is the solution to the problem. And I think to me, it's a bunch of people who are really helpful, willing to share resources. Like to me, I just aspire to be part of, like to be a worthy member of that community. So it's not a subject, it's like who I want to be, really.
I love that. I love that community aspect, and I think that's a really nice way of sort of framing it, because I think you're right. We were just having a quick chat before we started recording and talking about all of our mutual friends and colleagues in the field, and how it really is this kind of global network of colleagues in this field. I think you're being very humble. Sort of talk about how you want to be a worthy member of this community. I'm obviously not an arbiter of that in any way, but I certainly regard you as a member of this community. And I want to know more about how you became a member of this community, your academic journey. Tell us about where you studied, and of course, what led you to the role that you have now as assistant professor at Hong Kong Poly U.
I am actually a member of the Nottingham gang, as they say it. I think in CorpusLinguistics there are several gangs. The Lancaster gang or the Birmingham gang. Or
not literal gangs, I don't think England's, not that I know of. I mean, I can't imagine
people start one.
Out of the streets having fights. Maybe.
And then there are US gangs, of course. Like in the UK, these are the three major gangs, I think. And I belong to the Nottingham gang. So actually, like the whole journey started quite interestingly because I actually, I was born and I grew up in Hong Kong, and I went to Chinese University of Hong Kong, where I was taught by Professor Peter here, the researcher, the famous researcher, doing research on task-based learning, and I was his supervisor when I did my master's studies. And it was him who introduced me to the work of Polly Foster at UCL currently. So Professor Foster, Polly, conducted research on formulaic language. And then when I spoke with Peter about what I should do for my master's dissertation, he suggested why don't you do this? And that was how I got hooked up with the whole thing. And I have not left CorpusLinguistics and formulaic language since. And so the journey was that I looked at Polly Foster's research, which was the first ever study that got me started doing formulaic language research things. And I thought, okay, this is a very interesting study. What it needs is like the study was great, but then it would have been so much better. Many problems could have been solved if we have access, had she got access to Corpus. And then after doing the master's dissertations, I wanted to do a bit more research. And so I sat up with Peter asking, what should I do? And then he said, there are literally two good studies, there are two good universities in the UK where I could further my research on formulaic language and spoken language. And I applied to both, and the best one accepted me. And you know what that was? So I was just very pleased to be able to work with Nottingham people. And so since joining Nottingham University School of English, it is still very famous in terms of spoken, corpora, and formulaic language vocabulary research. And then the reason why I chose to go to Nottingham is because in the old days, if you want access to a corpus, you have to be an insider. And you have to be an insider of Birmingham to use the Bank of English, for example. I thought, okay, I want access. I thought the problems facing the study by Professor Foster was the lack of access to corpus data. So in order to solve that problem, I went on to Nottingham, where they have at that time, I think, for me, the biggest spoken corpus in English, which is CanCode. So I went there wanting to use CanCode for my PhD and embark on a new journey doing phonology and CorpusLinguistics together. So that was how it all started, and I was supervised by Professor Sven Adolphs, and I was part of the group led by Professor Ronald Carter. And then I met the vocabulary people in the School of English, Professor Norbert Sweet. And then I had many good classmates, and we had a vocabulary reading group. And so it was within the gang, we did many things. And So somehow the journey was totally shaped by Nottingham University, I have to say. Yeah.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. I love how you use the word gang. I just have those amazing images of sort of West Side Story, you know.
Yeah.
That would be great, actually. You've given me an idea. Your CorpusLinguistics musical. What next? And then, of course, you eventually found yourself your position at PolyU and doing the research that you're doing in language acquisition, formulaic language. And we'll start to sort of slowly work our way into this topic now, because I'm really interested to hear about some of the things that you've done and the fact that you are, you know, yes, you're doing the disciplinary research about language, but you're also doing work on producing, you know, tools and applications for people to use to explore. So we'll start to make our way through this. So yes, language acquisition broadly, obviously there's all sorts of things as this podcast is attempting to demonstrate with the various topics and the various guests, all sorts of applications of corpus methods. And your work broadly defined is in the area of language acquisition. What interests you about this?
Language acquisition. Like, first of all, I'm an English language learner. Like in Hong Kong, we spent like 20 years learning English. And so it's a personal endeavor as much as like my research. So what interests me about this topic, I suppose, like I'm doing this research because I encountered problems with formulaic language, with spoken language myself. And so I was trying to solve problems that I face, really.
Oh, you mentioned formulaic language, and I sort of introduced that term earlier on. We'll talk about some of the topics in language acquisition as well. But while we're here, what is formulaic language? What does this encompass as a kind of set of features in English?
Of course, we being corpus linguists, we are all familiar with the work of John C. Platt, Professor John C. Platt, and so his idioms principle and open choice principle. So basically, the work that I'm doing captures the work that he's like follows upon the work that he did in the domain of idioms principle. So idioms is the umbrella term, but I tend to use the term formulaic language instead to reflect the fact that I think there is a psycholinguistic perspective to on formulaic language, on phraseology. So there are many examples of formulaic expressions, formulaic language. They are basically conventionalized lexical combinations. They could be speech formulae. They could be like speech formulae would be things like, first of all, let me see, you know. And there could also be idioms, like at the end of the road, skating on thin ice, kill two birds with one stone. And then there could be proverbs, as 339 saves 9. And then sentence stems. I was just wondering, I don't suppose you would do something, collocations, multi-word units. Like there are many examples. So like traditionally, we thought of the word as the unit of analysis and the unit of language acquisition. But now, because of our awareness of formulaic language, we are trying to look at phrases and expressions as the unit of analysis.
Okay, so you mentioned John Sinclair, of course, who was at the University of Birmingham and sort of extending his work. So I suppose what we're dealing with here is the notion that we don't process language word by word necessarily, but there are larger sort of units that consist of maybe several words or even structures, but that we process them as essentially as a single unit of meaning.
Exactly.
So this is really interesting. I mean, there's been obviously a lot of research in language acquisition. It's taught in the UK on the English language curriculum at A level the last couple of years before students might go to university, and it's highly theoretical and talking about theories from decades ago, earlier in the 20th century. They talk about Bruner and Skinner, and of course Chomsky, universal grammar, all of these ideas. There's been a lot of thought about what happens in the brain when people acquire a language. But are there still mysteries? I mean, what is it that we don't know? Is there such a huge industry in English language teaching and trying to improve the process of learning language, making it easier and more accessible for people, and your research, I think, contributes to that endeavor. What is it that, is there still mystery? Has it been worked out, this is what happens? Or is there still a lot that isn't known about how we learn language?
Unfortunately, I have to admit that actually there are more things that we don't know than things that we know. and the situation is, and it's quite philosophical, like the fact that like if we know what we don't know, we already know. So we don't know, so we actually don't know what we don't know. And I think there are so many mysteries, and so few hands or brains or people work together to solve the problems. And to be honest, I think as researchers, we are just like people have been learning languages for as far as there were people on Earth. And so people went on learning language without any research. And what we do as researchers was just trying to observe how things work. And hopefully we could do a little bit to improve the processes based on data that we have. And I think you mentioned Skinner and all, and just want to follow up on that. And there is a famous quote that people like to quote whenever they talk about formulaic language, and which corpus linguists have proved to be wrong. So Pinker back in 1994 said that virtually every sentence that a person utters or understands is a brand new combination of words, appearing for the first time in the history of the universe. I think when we look at corpus data, we know how often people repeat, just speak formulaically, because one, people are lazy, two, because it's easier to process standard sentences. There is a common way of referring to things, and when people stick with the usual way of saying things, then communication becomes a lot easier. So I think it was a mystery ages ago, how people process language, but because of CorpusLinguistics, we know this is no longer a mystery. We know that people do repeat a lot.
Do you think Pinker? I mean, I see what you mean in that clearly we know through empirical work, looking at large samples of language data, that there's so much that is patterned and repeating in what we do. But are these formulaic expressions, is there a limit in terms of, yes, at the size of 3 or 4 or 5 words in length, there's an awful lot of repetition, but then very quickly, I imagine, when I talk to my students, occasionally I find myself in the horrible position of having to speak to students about, plagiarism, and because the similarity detection has found, all of this matching text, paragraphs and matching text, and have to have these difficult conversations where you're, how did you write this yourself? And a lot of that is on the basis of, it would be very unlikely that by complete coincidence, a student wrote a paragraph that's 30 words long in exactly the same way as this paragraph that already exists, right? So I suppose maybe from that perspective, Pinker is right in that is there a sort of threshold where after that, yes, it does become very unlikely that people are repeating exactly the same string of words in a row.
I think, mind you, when we talk about formulaic language, we are talking about the phrase level or even clause level.
Yeah.
But then, like, the thing with plagiarism covers that relates to the discourse level.
Yeah.
And we want some statistics, like how often do people repeat their phrases? According to research by Beatrice Warren and another colleague, they have a famous paper back in 2010 on the idiom's principle. Sorry, I should find the reference for you.
That's okay.
Yeah, and it's like about 50% of people's speech, spontaneous speech, consists of formulaic material. Yeah, so half of the time, like if you translate that into like actual words, so half of the time people create something new, the other half of the time they just use some formulaic, ready-made, prefabricated material.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I understand. That's it's and clearly, therefore, because there's so much of it, there is very, very good reason to study it in the context of language learning, because on that basis, it must be a very important part of the process of language learning to recognize and master the use of this formulaic language.
Yeah, because if people don't use formulaic language, actually speaking, writing would be very labor intensive. Can I use the term? Because calculate, use grammar, like think about what should I say next, and like stitch all the single words together based on grammar rules. And like if there is an alternative where people can be lazy, just use ready-made sentences that they memorize, things go a lot smoother, easier on the speaker, easier on the listener.
And obviously there's, I suppose, a distinction in this field between what you might call L1 language learning and L2 language learning. So L1 being first language or languages that the infant and the toddler and the young child, as they're growing up, is learning, and then any additional languages that may be learned at potentially any stage in life. In terms of the research and the work around understanding how these processes work, presumably there are some differences, say, between a baby learning how to babble and learning vocabulary to somebody in their 50s deciding that they want to learn Korean, for example, and attending classes and acquiring an additional language.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm trying to do in the past few years or decade was, like, one thing that we should remember is that for first language learners are always successful. I've not yet seen a case of first language learners not being successful. Like, and they do it so spontaneously, without going to classes, without effort. And the case that you mentioned, like 50-year-old folks wanting to learn Korean for the first time, despite the effort that they put in, they will still come across as unnatural or like unnative-like. So for me, there is a basic fundamental assumption in my research is, like, saying that first language learners are always successful and second language learners may not be successful. There could be some things that we could do with when we help second language learners. That must be something that we could possibly do to recreate the environment that first language learners experience, so that second language learners can also be more successful. So comparison between what learners, native, like first language learners do and second language learners do is a core part of like what I do, I suppose. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting, and yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I hadn't really considered that. The biggest difference is that L1 language learning is essentially always successful. I, to my shame, I suppose, consider myself to be, well, I am monolingual. I did study French at school, but I didn't know anything about corpus linguistics at the time, and I doubt that the materials in the class were informed by corpus methods at all. So I really didn't have any understanding that there were structures that could be learned, rather than essentially what I had in my head at the time, the idea that I just had to learn every word one by one and try and remember them all individually. And I was, to no surprise, unsuccessful in becoming anywhere near fluent in French. So I appreciate that, there clearly is a big difference, but I think there's a case, and of course, it would not be CorpusCast without talking about CorpusLinguistics. Clearly a case for the value of using corpus methods to help explore this. So with that in mind, in terms of your own research, looking at formulaic expressions using, among other methods, CorpusLinguistics, how do corpus methods help? What sorts of data do you look at, and what are you doing from a I suppose a methodological perspective?
I think there are different parts to my work. There is the psycholinguistic part, there is the corpus part, and hopefully my psycholinguistic research, my experiments would have been informing the corpus work that I am doing. So I'm hoping always that there is a theoretical basis to what I do. So the corpus research that I'm doing is not number crunching. I hope, because I came up with a theory, a hypothesis, in my 2012 paper, and it was the sort of the vision or the plan, as one might put it, that I try to prove that the thing that I've been doing is to try to prove the hypothesis right. And then, so this is some research that I finished a few years back. And so given that my hypothesis was right, so I was trying to come up with tools that help people solve that problem. So the kind of corpus that I built, obviously, in the past years, I've been using other people's corpora, and I know that you are interested in the philological corpora that I've been using. But before that, I use other people's corpora, and I also built my own corpora. One of the things that I built was a YouTube corpus, and actually there are two corpora that I built. There is a dynamic one that is I built a corpus of YouTube videos as YouTube videos become available on YouTube. So it keeps updating. So that dynamic YouTube corpus is necessary because it underlies my computer-assisted language learning tool called IdiomStream. There is a website for that. And so building that YouTube video and corpus, and I have another YouTube video corpus for analyzing the language features of YouTube videos. Because I think I'm so fond of YouTube because it is very accessible. Because people keep uploading new materials on YouTube, so the materials stays fresh all the time. And when we teach learners, when we ask learners to, hey, you don't have enough exposure to English outside the classroom that you talk of, this is a problem that we face. What you have to do is to increase your exposure to English outside the classroom. What can you do? You can go to YouTube and watch some videos. You could watch movies. You can listen to songs and so on.
So you talk about exposure as in hearing and seeing the language that you're learning around you, and mapping onto, as you said, what is it that's so successful about first language learning is that usually parents and caregivers are providing the material, right? that informs the language learning of the infant. Similarly with YouTube. Tell us more about IdiomStream. So how does this work? Is it running from the subtitles or the captions to get the data? What happens with the videos, and if someone were to log in, what would they be able to do with that tool?
So I would love to comment on like the use of YouTube as a learning resource and also as a spoken corpus.
Yeah.
And I also, like when you asked the questions, I was also trying to it reminds me of a quote from from Professor Robert Carter, and he said that first language learners of English are exposed to spoken input 90% of the time. 10% of the time they listen to English, they are exposed to English through the written world.
Okay.
Then, like later on, I think I wrote a paper saying that in Hong Kong, for example, where English is spoken as a foreign language, we really spend 90% of the time being exposed to English written input, and only 10% of the time we get to hear the sounds of English. So that's a major difference. But then for idiomship, what I'm trying to do is to adjust the balance so that in Hong Kong, like in parts of Asia, we won't get like only 10% exposure to spoken English. And I was hoping that we could increase the exposure to maybe 30% of the time. Because literally, when you walk out of the university campus in Hong Kong, very rarely you get the chance to speak English with anyone. Like you see signs everywhere. Everyone's good at like comprehension, like listening comprehension in English, but then people haven't got a chance to really use the language spoken. So idiom strip, what it does is when people log in, they can search for topics that interest them. It could be football, it could be baking, it could be anything. And then the tool would go live to YouTube and extract videos that are English captioned on that specific topic. And then it will scan the YouTube videos in terms of its difficulty. Like some YouTube videos are just too difficult in terms of lexis, too difficult words that are too difficult beyond the proficiency level of learners. And there are videos which are too fast, like the speaker speaking so fast that learners could not understand, possibly. So we try to estimate the difficulty level, lexical difficulty level, and the speech rate of the videos before, and then we later on all the information in front of the learners when we present a window of maybe 15 videos for people to choose from on the topics of baking and football. And then they could click on the videos, and then they will be shown a list of noteworthy idiomatic expressions and vocabulary items that they can learn from that particular video. And then after watching the video, my idiom tool would extract lines concordancing as we understand it. Like I would generate concordances of those noteworthy vocabulary in the videos, and then ask people to do fill in the blanks and just like we present the concordance lines in the window, and then people have to fill in what they thought they heard, and then they get tips. They could go back to the exact same moment when that idiom or the formulaic expression was used. If they forget what the correct answer may be. And then I've also built in like speaking practices, so people could practice pronouncing their idioms, the formulaic expressions. Because I think, like based on my hypothesis, like speaking, articulating the sounds of formulaic expressions really does help with memory of the expressions. So there is speaking, there's filling the blanks, there is also like spelling. People remember the form of the expressions. Yeah.
Wow.
And
so that's incredible. That's incredible. So how so someone logs in and said, I'm interested in I don't know, pop music or football or something, and it does. How long does it take before it comes back and go, okay, here's all the idioms, here's the the concordance lines, here's the, all these resources about the language in these videos.
10 seconds.
10 seconds. Wow.
Yes.
That's incredible. If people, sort of fed back, I suppose, and told you about how they're using it and if it's helping them.
During the pandemic, many schools used my e-literature, like local schools. There are a few schools abroad as well. Because there were class suspensions, everyone was doing Zoom classes, and the teachers still wanted the students to get some exposure to English outside the classroom. They assigned the students to use YouTube daily as work. And because I've got within YouTube, I've got an interface particularly developed for teachers so that they could monitor the students who has done the idiom strip homework, who has watched which video, and which idioms have been learned by the class as a whole, and which idioms do people have constant problems with. And then they were there is a page of analytics for teachers anyway. And then I was trying to do multimodal concordancing as well with the YouTube because I thought, okay, instead of just presenting the line, presenting the original line in the YouTube videos.
Yes, okay.
Allow people to hear.
Yes.
Of things. Yeah.
That's a more challenging task, I imagine. Aligning the transcript to the video.
I mean, it's I try to use YouTube as a spoken corpus, but you see with spoken corpus because I think because YouTube videos with the time codes, they are time aligned, so it saves the task of it's a great help anyway with because of the time alignment. But how accurate are the time codes in YouTube caption? And remember, YouTube caption could be uploaded by users, or they could be automatically generated. So there are accuracy problems, there are standardization problems.
Yeah. Yes, I was going to ask. Of course, a lot of it is automated, and also I suppose that a challenge is that you're not really able to control for varieties of English, right? And maybe in some contexts learners are trying to learn a particular variety, or British or American or any or maybe more broadly it doesn't matter so much. But I think it's a really it's a brilliant tool. I think it's a great idea, and I love because it's personalized. You can personalize it. You can whatever you're interested in. We know that that aids with motivation if students are able to choose things that they personally like. So I think it's a great example of an application of corpus linguistics, which of course is what we're all about on the podcast. We'll start to wrap things up as we come to a close, but I do want to ask you about something that you're working on at the moment. I believe one of your current projects, trying to, as I understand it, predict the learnability of I believe a set of over 40,000 formulaic expressions. So what is this learnability, and how are you working on trying to predict this?
In CorpusLinguistics and in formulaic language research, a major problem that we encounter is that we haven't got a list of items we haven't got a formulaic language syllabus, even though we have been saying for the past 40 years how important formulaic expressions are for second-hand learners.
So do you mean similar to like a I know there's the general service list, for instance, of the most common individual words in a language that should be learned. Is it a similar idea, but trying to do that with formulaic expressions?
We have word lists. We have the GEO list. We have academic word lists, but we haven't got a formulaic language list. So while we're thinking to teachers that we have to sort out learners' problems with learning formulaic expressions, we actually haven't done anything or much enough things for them. There are, of course, shorter lists of expressions, but they are like not long enough to make a syllabus to help us to systematically teach a bit of expressions across maybe 10 years to learners of English. So what this learnability is, with the academic word list and with like 4 nations word list, the thing is that in the past people have been ranking like the priority, deciding the priority of teaching which word based on how frequent they are.
Yeah.
In corpus linguistics, we believe in frequency. But then I think frequency is important, but not the only criteria. So in this learnability idea, the learnability idea actually incorporates a range of factors, like semantic transparency, intelligibility, the length of the expression, word association, like are there word associates within the expression? For example, king of the castle. King of the castle, icing on the cake. Like these items should presumably be easier to remember than like expressions in which there are no word associates. For example, kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Birds, stone, kill, not associates. So learnability is a range of those factors that I believe would affect how easy it is to learn an expression.
Are there phonological elements too? So I know that's another thing that you're interested in. You mentioned King of the Castle.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a semantic associate, but because you've got the same consonant, King of the Castle, does that help with remembering or learning as well?
That's a very good point, and I should have included it in the next research.
No, I just know I know from your work that phonology is another thing that you're sort of integrating with your corpus work, which I think is really interesting too.
Yeah. So anyway, with this learnability, with the current version of the learnability index, I've got 5 factors in, one of which is frequency. And in that project, in this current project that I'm working on, so I've like counting the frequency of formulaic expressions is such an impossible task. It's impossible, and I've been trying to solve the problem. I've been trying to solve the problem for years, and I've figured out how to do it recently. Like it's not 100% watertight, the method, but it helps. So I've been trying to use Google Books APIs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because like in order to count the frequency of formulaic expressions in a corpus, we need not a large corpus, but a mega corpus. Like Google Books and RAMs has got billions of words, so that corpus is large enough for me to the frequency of 40,000 formulaic expressions, and that's exactly what I did. But it was such a tedious process.
I can imagine. You're right. I was going to ask, the data for this sort of task is going to have to be a huge data set. I was imagining, something like the N1010 corpora that are these huge internet corpora, billions and billions of words as well. And so you take this list and you apply the features that you mentioned there that help you work out learnability
of expression, and then I apply because I do statistics modeling as well. So I came with a statistical model of learnability based on which involves the 5 factors. And once I developed that statistical model, I map it onto the 40,000 items, and then I have a list of 40,000 formulaic expressions arranged in ascending order of learnability, ready to send it to some kind of formulaic language proficiency tests, some kind of formulaic language syllabi.
And I'm putting you on the spot here, but what is the most learnable? What's number 1 at the top of the list? The most learnable formulaic expression? Probably something full of
surprised because I'm just I use a small sample in my experiment. So the item that was most learned to Hong Kong learners of English was or is as a matter of fact.
Oh, wow. Okay. As a matter of fact. Okay.
Yeah.
There you go. There's a tip for people watching or listening. That's if you're going to learn anything in English, then you need to learn as a matter of fact.
I suppose people should begin with the easiest items, like the most learnable items, and then work their way down to the more difficult ones.
Yeah. And then once you've learned all 40,000 of them, you get a medal or a prize from Phoebe Lin.
I think you'll become a Nobel Prize with that. Like I haven't anyone knowing all 48,000 expressions yet, because I've been asking, like, you have been with this. Like I was trying to find British learners of like first language. I was trying to find first language British speakers, British English speakers to fill in my surveys.
Oh, yes, I remember you when you emailed me. Yes, yeah.
People from different age groups would tend to use or would tend to know different expressions. And some expressions are definitely very archaic that younger people would not know. So I didn't think, I'm not suggesting people should learn all 40, like learners of English, second-hand learners of English should learn all 40,000 expressions, because that's not necessary. And like first language native speakers of English don't know that many expressions either.
So it's more of a very useful kind of insight and a guide, I suppose, to knowing more about what this is all about. Really, the fact that so much of language is chunks of units of words rather than individual words. This is fascinating. I wish we could talk more and more about this, because it's really interesting. It's so fun as well to hear the passion and excitement that you have about this work that you're doing. It's clearly something that you're really sort of passionate about. We're going to start to wrap up now with maybe the segment of the episode that the guests dread a little bit. My quick questions. So now it's time for Dr. Phoebe Lin to sit in the hot seat. I wish we could have some dramatic lighting or some music or something. I might have to ask Sam, our producer, whether we can the production values have a sound effect or something. Yeah, he's probably sat there going, "Oh no, not more work. Please stop, Robbie." Oh, I heard something there. I don't know what that was. Listen to that. Can you hear that?
Yeah. Very cool.
Okay. Let's go with it. Not quite the. I was thinking something a bit more like a bit more dramatic, but we'll go with it. We'll let him play in the background. Quick. He's having fun now. I regret this already. Okay, this will do. We'll go with this. Okay. Sorry, Phoebe. You're apparently you're being tested on here with this music. Quick question number 1. What is the biggest change you've noticed in corpus research in your career?
I was thinking 2, not just 1. Like the biggest change now is ChatGPT. And
okay.
If I don't want to talk about ChatGPT, another option I would say is the move towards quantitative corpus linguistics.
Okay.
Because when I learned corpus linguistics, it was more like analyzing concordance lines, and now we are moving towards more statistical approaches to analyzing dispersion indices and so on.
Something that makes me increasingly nervous, because I struggle sometimes with the highly statistical or programmatic aspects of the work that some people do in corpus linguistics. A lot of it goes over my head.
Always new things, and we all in corpus linguistics, but because it's so the discipline is so close to technology that I often find myself constantly needing to learn something new, and Yeah, and including like quantitative corpus linguistics, like there are some new indices that I was not aware of, and like
Mm.
always like googling like how to solve problems and so on. Yeah,
Yeah. I'm glad I'm not
yeah,
not the only one. Okay, quick question number two.
yeah,
What is the biggest misconception of corpus linguistics that you've encountered?
yeah. I'm gonna say, most of my students, like when I say, "Hey, I'm your corpus linguistics teacher this year," they will say, "Oh, sorry, I'm so worried about everything." Like they thought they needed to be proficient in computing in order to be a corpus linguist. That's not really true because there are many great tools that get people started to corpus linguistics. One of the tools that I recommend, I always teach the use of the matrix, for example. My students use it all the time for their projects, for their dissertations. Like you don't need to be like the misconception is people think that they need to be excellent at using computers in order to be to do corpus linguistics research, which is totally not true. Yeah,
Mm.
there are
I
many
think
levels of corpus linguistics, I think.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that the thing that's much more important is understanding language,
Yeah,
understanding linguistics. That's I think the main prerequisite for getting into corpus linguistics. So we're in agreement there. Finally, before I bring you the relief, I suppose, of coming to the end of the episode. Final quick question: how do you think corpus linguistics will make an impact on the world in the future? Where is this going? What is there left to do, and what is corpus linguistics going to do in the future?
I think corpus linguistics is a big thing. But like we may not realize it, but like it is happening because all the things like I like to say because in the modern world we leave many digital traces, and then like those uh, like one of the digital traces that we leave is text data, and lots of people to get discover patterns behind the text data. And there are many users of such text data. And this is where corpus linguistics comes in, I think. Yeah.
Because that'll only continue to increase more and more textual traces of human existence, I suppose.
Yeah, it like the analysis of like the analysis of digital traces would allow us to develop tools that help make life easier, more efficient, more handy, convenient. And then from a research point of view, we also want to know how people, like from a from a sociology point of view, sociological point of view, we also want to know like how do people live their lives and what do people like to do. Of course, not to mention like such data will have huge implications for marketing, for commercial purposes. But then like just even as a sociology research topic, analyzing digital traces is interesting. Like especially like these days, we generate so much YouTube data, we generate so much like chat data and video conferencing data. Such data will have huge potential, commercial potential and research potential, and it's exciting. I think like I'm biased, of course, but I think corpus linguistics is the future of linguistics.
Oh, okay. I like that. What a way to end with a bold proclamation. That's what I like to hear. Thank you so much, Phoebe. This has been really, really interesting. It's been great to get to know you a bit more and what you're doing and your brilliant and very, very exciting research in this area, and that you have such an optimism and excitement about the future of what this can do. So thank you so much, and of course thank you as always to you. This is where I very unnaturally break the fourth wall and stare into my camera again. People who are watching us on YouTube or listening on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Podchaser, and all the other pod websites, whatever they are. why not subscribe and let us know what you think, however you're accessing CorpusCast. And you can always talk about it on Twitter or maybe even Mastodon these days using the hashtag CorpusCast. Make sure to check out the Aston Corpus Linguistics research group on Twitter at Aston Corpus, and you can follow me at LoveMob. CorpusCast is an Aston Originals podcast written and hosted by me, Robbie Love, and produced by my excellent colleague who probably has too many buttons at his disposal to play sound effects that I didn't know he had, Sam Cook. And all that's left for me to do is to thank our guest once again, Dr. Phoebe Lin from Hong Kong Polytechnic University. It's been a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Robbie and Sam.